Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some fascinating material today, really digging into on-site discussions from the city of David. Our goal is to pull out the key insights for you.
Exactly. We want to make this complex history and archaeology accessible, focusing on the most compelling bits without getting, bogged down.
Sounds good. So we're talking Tomb of Zacharias, maybe David's tomb, the Pool of Siloam, and the Roman destruction evidence.
That's the plan. We'll sift through the commentary from those tours and discussions you sent, highlighting the really crucial takeaways on those specific sites.
Okay, let's jump in. The Tomb of Zacharias. I gather there's some confusion right off the bat about which Zacharias we're talking about.
That's right. You've got prophets, high priests, several figures share the name in Jewish history, but the key thing isn't really nailing down the exact person.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more about the tradition that grew up around Zacharias, someone seen as really virtuous. And because of that, people wanted to be buried near him. It became a desirable spot.
Right, clustering around this respected figure.
Hmm.
And the tomb itself, architecture-wise, it looks distinctive. Hellenistic, Doric capitals. What's a nefesh?
Good eye. The style definitely screams Hellenistic period. Those Doric capitals are a classic sign. The nefesh is basically the monument part, the marker. In this case, it looks like it was never quite finished.
Unfinished. How so?
Well, it seems like it was maybe meant to have a pyramid top or be more elaborate, but it's got these sort of incomplete pillars. Maybe work stopped, maybe it was damaged later. Hard to say for sure.
And this term, distyle in anti, what does that architectural feature signify?
Ah, right. That's a specific setup. Two columns between two projecting walls or pilasters. It's like architectural shorthand.
Shorthand for what?
For importance, basically. You saw it on temples, fancy public buildings, maybe tombs of really significant or holy people in the Hellenistic and Roman eras. So seeing it here tells you this wasn't just some random burial. It was intended to be substantial.
Got it. Okay, so fast forward a bit. The area around the tomb changed quite a bit, especially concerning burials during the Jordanian period.
It did, yeah. So mid-20th century, 1948 to 67, that whole slope was packed with Jewish graves, people wanting to be near Zacharias, but then the Jordanian authorities cleared them all out.
All of them. Wow. But I read about someone named Lomo Salmansor. His memory survived that.
It did, which is quite telling. He was a big deal in the 19th century, helped rebuild the Herva synagogue. He and his wife were buried there following that tradition.
So even though the original grave was removed.
Exactly. His contribution was so significant that later on, a new memorial marker was put back in the area to remember him. Shows how some legacies endure.
And the site also became important for the early Zionist movement, right? As a place of remembrance.
Yes, it took on that layer too. It's interesting how they decided to kind of mark a starting point. They chose 1860, when Jews started building outside the old city walls, as the year to begin counting those who died in conflicts tied to the Zionist cause.
But there was an earlier case.
Right. A sort of footnote, but important. A man killed back in 1851 for his activities. He's considered the very first, even though it's before 1860. Wow. And he was also initially buried near there. It connects these different eras of Jewish history in Jerusalem.
And the burials themselves around the tomb of Zacharias, what different types were there?
We see a few different practices in the archaeology, bodies placed directly into niches cut in the rock.
Okay.
Then you have some burials in coffins that just weren't ever moved. And also ossuaries, those stone boxes where they'd collect the bones later after decomposition, gives you a snapshot of different customs.
Right, okay. Let's shift gears to maybe the most debated spot, David's tomb, or at least a potential location in the Weil excavations. Sounds like most experts are pretty skeptical.
That's definitely the prevailing view, yeah. You might see signs or hear guides refer to it as David's tomb, but archaeologically speaking, the evidence isn't really there to make a definitive link.
Why not? What's missing?
Mostly, it lacks specific features you'd expect for a royal tomb from the First Temple period, which is David's time. There's nothing that screams, King David was buried here, unequivocally.
But there are arguments people make for it potentially being the site, aren't there? Based on the Bible, maybe?
Oh, for sure. And the biblical accounts are key here. The Book of Kings says David was buried inside the city of David. That was unusual back then. Burials were normally outside the walls.
So that detail itself is significant.
Exactly. It implies his tomb was really important. And later kings, like Menashe, were supposedly buried nearby in the Garden of Uzzah, though we don't know exactly where that garden was.
And then you have later Jewish texts, like the Mishnah, discussing moving graves. How does that relate?
Well, the Mishnah generally says you don't move graves. It's a big deal, but it makes exceptions. Like if a grave is causing a public nuisance or potentially for king's tombs. They even cite King Uzziah being moved. And some rabbinic sources even mention something quite specific. Tunnels running from David's tombs down towards the Kidron Valley, maybe for dealing with ritual impurity. So there's this textual tradition placing important tombs in that general area.
We also have Nehemiah mentioning building the wall near David's tombs, and even the New Testament referencing them.
Yep. Nehemiah's rebuilding account places a section of the wall near the tombs of David. And in Acts, during the Second Temple period, Peter says David's tomb is among us to this day, suggesting its location within Jerusalem was known then.
And wasn't there a story about Herod looting the tomb? Josephus wrote about that, right?
That's a big one. Josephus, writing in the 1st century CE, recounts Herod supposedly breaking into the tomb looking for treasure. Whether it's true or not, it shows that some specific place was widely believed to be David's tomb and considered important enough to rob centuries after his death.
Which kind of leads to a darker theory, that the Romans might have just destroyed it after 70 CE.
It's a plausible scenario, though hard to prove definitively. After crushing the revolt, the Romans really dismantled Jerusalem. The idea that they'd target such a symbolic site like David's tomb makes sense, you know? Maybe even quarried the area, turned it into building stone to completely erase that Jewish connection.
But no smoking gun for that?
Not really. It fits the pattern of Roman actions, but direct archaeological proof of that specific act is missing. So it remains a theory.
So bottom line on David's tomb in the city of David, still very much an open question.
Precisely. Lots of interesting threads, textual hints, historical possibilities pointing towards this area, but that slam dunk archaeological evidence just isn't there. The debate continues.
Okay, let's move to something less debated, but maybe equally significant, that Greek inscription found nearby. Now it's in the Israel Museum.
Yes, and it's an incredibly important find. Finding any evidence of a synagogue from the Second Temple period inside Jerusalem is rare.
Why is that so rare?
Because the temple totally dominated religious life then. Synagogues were maybe seen as less essential right there. Plus, after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, they rebuilt it as Aelia Capitolina, a Roman pagan city, burying or destroying much of what was there before.
So what does this inscription actually say? It mentions a Theodore.
It does. It's a dedication by this guy, Theodore, son of Ethanol. He calls himself a priest and an arches synagogos, basically, head of the synagogue.
Okay.
And interestingly, he mentions his father and grandfather were also arch-synagogos, so it seems like a family tradition of leadership.
And what was the synagogue for, according to the inscription?
It spells it out. Reading the Torah, teaching the commandments, and this is really interesting. It served as a guest house with rooms and water facilities specifically for Jews visiting from the diaspora from outside Judea.
So it highlights different functions compared to the temple.
Yeah.
Not just prayer.
Exactly. The temple was the place for sacrifices and large-scale prayer. This synagogue seems more focused on study, teaching, and community support, especially for visitors. Prayer isn't the main thing mentioned here.
That focus on diaspora Jews connects to ideas about where synagogues started, right?
It does. The common theory is that synagogues really took off in places like Babylon, Alexandria. Rome communities far from the temple needed their own centers for study and gathering. This inscription shows that model was also present in Jerusalem, maybe influenced by those diaspora communities.
And the name, Theodore. It sounds Greek or Roman. How would a Jewish priest in Jerusalem end up with that name?
That's a great question. It's quite possible his ancestors were among Jews taken to Rome as slaves, maybe after Pompey's conquest generations earlier.
Oh, like freedmen.
Exactly. Slaves often took the family name of their former owners upon being freed. Think of Flavius Josephus. He took the name Flavius from the Roman emperors who freed him. So Theodore could signal a connection, maybe generations back, to the Jewish community in Rome.
Which leads to a potential connection with the New Testament. The synagogue of the freedmen.
It's a very tempting link. Acts chapter 6 mentions a synagogue of the freedmen in Jerusalem, likely meaning former slaves or their descendants, probably from Rome. The name Theodore, the diaspora focus, it lines up really well. It's a fantastic potential bridge between the archaeology and the text.
Really fascinating. Okay, let's move south to the Pool of Siloam. I heard its rediscovery was almost accidental.
Totally accidental. Well, sort of. For years, people knew the general area, and there was a later pool near a minaret that people thought was it. But in 2003, workers were just repairing a sewage pipe.
Just routine maintenance.
Pretty much. And bam, the excavator hits these ancient steps. Archaeologist Eli Shukran was nearby, rushed over, and immediately realized they'd stumbled onto the actual Second Temple period pool of Saloma. Just incredible luck.
And this location fit with historical descriptions, like from Josephus.
Perfectly. Josephus clearly describes the Pool of Siloam as marking the southern edge of Jerusalem in his time. And this newly found pool is right there in the city of David, exactly where his description would place it. It nailed the location.
And of course, its main claim to fame for many is the New Testament story.
Absolutely. The story in John chapter 9, where Jesus tells the blind man to go wash in the pool of Siloam and he comes back seeing, that makes it a hugely important site for Christians, especially Catholics. It's a place of pilgrimage because of that miracle.
Were there other things found there before this big discovery, older structures?
Yes, earlier digs nearby had found foundations of a Byzantine church from the 5th century, built by Empress Eudocia, and later a mosque was built on top of or near that. So the spot clearly remains significant through different periods, layered with history.
And the water itself, how would it get there? It's connected to the Gihon Spring via Hezekiah's tunnel, right?
Correct. The water source is the Gihon Spring, channeled through Hezekiah's massive tunnel engineered back in the 8th century BCE. That tunnel brought the spring water inside the city walls.
And that matters for things like ritual purity.
It does. Spring water is considered living water in Jewish law, suitable for a mikveh, a ritual bath. Collected rainwater isn't the same, so the fact it was fed by a spring is significant for understanding its potential use for purification rituals.
I also saw a note about an even earlier pool possibly being underneath the Herodian one, made of plaster.
Yeah, there's some evidence suggesting that the big stone-paved pool we see now, likely Herodian, might have been built over an older, simpler version, maybe from the Hasmonean period, constructed with plaster. So the use of this spot as a major water feature and maybe a ritual site could go back even further.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the road from the Pool of Siloam leading up towards the temple and the discoveries there. Very powerful stuff connecting to the end of the revolt.
This part is incredibly moving, I think. Archaeologists uncovered this wide, stepped street climbing up from the pool. This is the path pilgrims would have taken after purifying themselves, heading towards the Temple Mount.
A main thoroughfare.
Definitely. Likely lined with shops, bustling with activity, but it's also where some of the most poignant evidence of the Roman destruction in 70 CE was found.
How so? What links it to the siege?
Well, Josephus in the Jewish War gives this harrowing account of the final moments Jews hiding in the drainage channels and sewers beneath the city streets as the Romans were basically mopping up.
Hiding underground.
Exactly. And when archaeologists excavated the main drainage channel running under this paved street, they found direct evidence of that. Sections of the paving stones above were smashed open like the Romans were breaking through to get at people hiding below.
Wow. Direct physical evidence.
And then what they found inside the drain, numerous coins, all dating from the last year or two of the revolt, right up to 70 CE. And really hitting home, complete pottery cooking pots.
Complete pots. Why is that significant?
It suggests people fled down there in utter desperation, taking their last bits of food, their cooking gear, hoping to survive. It wasn't like they carefully packed, you know? It was grab and go into hiding.
That really paints a picture of those final moments.
It does. I heard Professor Amishai Mazar, a very respected archaeologist, talk about visiting the site. He said it reminded him so much of accounts of Jews hiding in the sewers of Warsaw during the Holocaust. That same desperate flight into the hidden spaces beneath the city under siege. It's a powerful, sobering parallel across millennia.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking to be able to stand there today and connect so directly with that history.
It really is. To walk where those pilgrims walked, and then to see the evidence of that final, awful destruction literally under your feet. It's a profound experience. The ability to return and tell these stories is quite something.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot. The layers of history at the tomb of Zacharias, the ongoing mystery surrounding David's tomb, that amazing synagogue inscription giving us a window into Second Temple life.
The dramatic rediscovery of the Pool of Siloam and its significance, and then this incredibly vivid evidence right from the drains of Jerusalem's fall to the Romans.
It really does provide those aha moments, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Seeing how the archaeology lines up with or sometimes challenges the historical texts.
Absolutely. It makes the past feel much more tangible, much more real. These aren't just stories in a book. You can see the physical remnants.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners. think about this constant conversation between what we find in the ground and the stories we tell about the past. How do these discoveries keep reshaping what we think we know? And what might still be buried beneath the city of David, waiting to tell us even more about these critical times? It's a story that's definitely not finished yet.